Jaylon Johnson, news of a 4-year deal. And it is a surprise in multiple ways. First, there's no reason for Jaylon Johnson to agree to this deal now. None whatsoever. He has leverage. He can put the squeeze on the Bears. He has until July 15. He doesn't have to sign the franchise tender. He's no more an employee of the team than you or I are, Myles. I don't know why the deal was done now, because whatever the Bears would do now, they would do more on or before July 15. That's typically how it goes. That's when the two sides come together with their best number, right at the deadline. That's one surprise. The other surprise is the amount. The franchise tender is $19.8 million. The average value of this 4-year deal is $19 million. Something doesn't fit here. Now, we'll see what the full details are in time. It could be that the deal is grossly front-loaded and that there's less money on the back end. That would make no sense, though. Whatever the details are, just the fact that it's 19 when the tag was 19.8, that seems off. MDS pointed that out yesterday when the first reports came out, and we're assuming the first reports are accurate because we know. There's a chance they're not. Let's say they are accurate, and it really is 19 or not less than 19. It still doesn't make sense. And my phone was blowing up all night. We didn't even talk about the fact that I went to a high school basketball game. I do it very rarely, but while I was there, my phone's blowing up with people from around the league saying, this can't be right, this can't be right, this can't be right. Something's going on. This doesn't make sense. So we'll find out. Maybe today, maybe over the weekend, but it just seems odd that he would trade in, because that's what you do. You trade in the franchise tag for a long-term deal. It better be a good long-term deal before you give up that tag, Myles.
Well, right. And also, I mean, we played that clip of him with Keyshawn Johnson, and, I apologize to Keyshawn Johnson for saying this, but I did not know that he had a podcast in a studio like that. It's the first I'm seeing of it, but it's interesting. I mean, he says he wants to be the highest paid corner, right? And so if you get tagged and then you're going to head into a not really free agency because you're not quite free, but, you have the opportunity to meet with other teams and you don't have a deadline until mid-July. It's kind of like, well, if you really want to be that, then why wouldn't you try to put the squeeze on the Bears in some way? He didn't do that at all. So I don't know what's going on with this and what's going on with him and with the Bears and with his representation. I mean, you sort of get the feel, because we were just in Indianapolis and we were just at the combine, that maybe his agent, talked to some folks and found out that there wasn't as good of a market as there might have been for his services. However, when you get the franchise tag, then that means you have a certain amount of leverage. So it's odd that he would agree to something like this soon, unless there's just some feeling of comfort that he's got with Chicago and that he wants to be there. And I that's the only thing that I can guess that actually makes this make sense, because otherwise, I mean, you're looking at the numbers, and Mike, I mean, you point this out all the time, right? You almost want to use like an allegedly tag when we first hear the reported numbers, and because oftentimes they're lower. So if that's the case with this, then it's like, man, what in the world's going on here? I don't really get it, but people want to secure their future, and this is more money than most of us will ever see in our lifetimes. Then I guess that's what makes it make sense.
The key factor will be how much money is fully guaranteed for Jaylon Johnson at signing. The report is $54 million guaranteed. Like, they don't even try to acknowledge the reality that telling me how much is guaranteed is not the same as telling me how much is fully guaranteed. The word guaranteed does not mean fully guaranteed. It implies it to the untrained eye, to the casual fan. Oh, 54 million guaranteed. No. Guaranteed for injury, there's a lesser amount that is fully guaranteed. That's usually how it goes. And you mentioned that we're toying with the idea of throwing the word allegedly in front of the initial reports. I mean, we're having an active conversation among the writers at PFT. What do we do about these bogus, baloney, overstated reports that the reporters will push, the agents give it, and the reporters report it, and it ends up being wrong? Because at some point it blows back on us. So our options are to just use the word allegedly, to just not put the numbers out there until we have the real numbers, which is a very viable option. Or I think the leader in the clubhouse, or in the leader house, as Chris would say, is to come up with kind of a snarky disclaimer that gets put in every one of these stories about how the ritual, the habit, the practice is the agent lies to the reporters and the reporters pass the lie along, knowing they're passing the lie along, but they don't care. They don't care about passing a lie along to their followers on X, to their audience wherever. They pass the lie along so they can at least have the part of it that's true. So we'll figure out how to handle that. But we'll know what Jaylon Johnson got. Here's how it works, though, with the franchise tag. And look, I don't recognize the name of the agent. And I'm not going to name the agent. I'm not trying to shame the agent. I've had a couple of different people try to attack the agent. But you know what? That's what other agents do. One of the things I've learned over the years, the agents don't really get along well. They're in competition. And if they can say something bad about another agent, they will. But here's the reality. Franchise tag. This is how you take a franchise tag and turn it into a long-term deal. $19.8 million. That's what Jaylon Johnson is absolutely fully guaranteed to make this year under the tag. So he plays out this year. He gets tagged again next year, assuming he plays well enough and he doesn't suffer a catastrophic injury. Tag next year, 20% raise by rule. $23.76 million is what he would make next year under the tag. That's $43.56 million over 2 years. Over 2 years. Well over $19.8 million average. That makes him the highest paid de facto because Jair Alexander is the highest paid right now at 21, not 19, or 18.9, which would have made Jaylon Johnson the highest at 19. So the starting point for the negotiation on a long-term deal is 43.56 over 2 years fully guaranteed, and then you fill in the rest. That's how it's done. And whoever negotiated the deal deviated from that for no reason, unless Jaylon Johnson just said, you know what, I'd rather get whatever I'm getting fully guaranteed above 19.8 because I can blow out my knee at any given time. Maybe he had a moment at some point last year where he thought he had suffered a serious injury. Or somebody he knows told him, hey, man, grab that money while you can. That's his prerogative, but that conflicts with what he said to Keyshawn Johnson about being the highest paid corner in football. And maybe that was all part of the ruse to get to 19, but it flies in the face of how these are usually done, which is why a lot of people are surprised. At the end of the day, it's his prerogative. I hope that he had all the options laid out for him the right way. And he understood and realized if he waited, good chance he's going to get more. Whatever the offer is today, Myles, it's not going to be worse on July 15. He took the money, but if he's not going to show up and play, if he's going to stay away for the offseason program, whatever they had today, unless they really convince the agent, no, it's going down, whatever's on the table today is going to be there July 15th, so what's the rush?
All right. And it's interesting, too, because it's not like they are changing defensive schemes. They're not changing defensive play callers. Matt Eberflus is still going to call that defense as the head coach. He said that. So it's not like he's really going to be missing so much that he can't come back in, for training camp and he'll be so far behind the eight ball. Or maybe he feels that way. I don't know. But that's really the interesting thing. You don't use your leverage when you have leverage. Well, there must be a reason why. So I'm really curious to figure out what the reason why is, because like I said, it's not like he's going to be missing all that much in the offseason program. Hell, there are some people in the PA that don't want the offseason program to really exist at all. And we should just come in a few weeks before training camp and all that. So it's one of those weird situations, Mike, where we look at it and we're like, that's very unusual. When there are outliers, then it's like you really just want to understand why the outlier is the outlier. And I think that as of right now, this contract really is an outlier.
Absolutely. And again, we'll find out more in the coming days, maybe hours, as to what was happening here. But remember, and this is the way that the players can push back against the franchise tag. The franchise tag is horrible for players generally. We talked about it earlier this week. I wrote something about it at PFT. The power that the player has is it starts with saying, I'm just not going to show up. I'm not under contract. I'm not your employee. I don't accept the 1-year tender. You've made me a 1-year tender offer at $19.8 million. I choose not to accept it. So I will not be there for the off-season program. I will not be there for the start of training camp. I will not be there for the end of training camp. I will not be there for the preseason. I will sign the tender just before the start of the regular season and still make the $19.8 million with no further effort expended on my part. The only risk you take if you do that is that they might rescind the tender. A lot of players would say, fine, go ahead. Somebody else will sign me then. You know, the thought has traditionally been the big money stops flowing a couple of days into free agency. You get one of these guys who's a high-end player who gets blocked from free agency by the franchise tag. He comes available later. He's still getting paid. Jeremiah Trotter got paid in June of 2002 or 3, I think it was, when the Eagles rescinded the tender. Washington signed him. When Washington took the tender off of Josh Norman several years back after Super Bowl 50 and he was due for a new contract, they stripped the tender in April. Washington gave him a bunch of money again. So, hey, Jaylon, you know, now Dan Snyder's gone now, but somebody's going to give Jaylon Johnson a big contract if that tender gets rescinded. So that's one of the tools you have. And the other tool is I'm just going year to year, the Kirk Cousins approach. Speaking of Washington yet again, I'll play under the tag 1 year, I'll play under the tag a second year, and then I'll become an unrestricted free agent. So I just hope that Jaylon Johnson had someone who understands the process advising him on his options and what's behind door number 1, what's behind door number 2, what's behind door number 3. Here are the different things you can do. It's up to you to decide what to do. And he decided to take the deal now. At a minimum, I would have said, Jaylon. Let's just see what they do as we get closer to July 15th, because that's usually when these planes get landed. You're landing this plane 4 months early. Let's wait. It isn't going to get worse. Trust me. It's not going to get worse between now and then. It's only going to get better.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, he just didn't want to do that, I guess, for whatever reason, right? I mean, like, you know, you talk about.
I just hope he was told. I hope he was told.
Yeah.
That's the question, though. Was he told that?
Right. Yes. And not. I mean, that's a much bigger issue. But I think, you know, you talk about players who have gone through this process, right? I mean, I think of Jesse Bates, right, with the Cincinnati Bengals. He did not show up for the offseason program training camp because he wasn't an employee, as you said. And then he played well, goes into free agency the next year and signs a big deal with the Atlanta Falcons. Played well for them last year. I mean, the difference between a cornerback or a member of the secondary, I guess, as you would call with Jesse Bates, and then let's call it a running back, right? I mean, you know, last year we kept talking about Saquon Barkley and then Josh Jacobs, right, and how they were franchise tagged. And Tony Pollard was also franchise tagged. He ran right in and he signed that franchise tender because of the way the market was working with running backs. You know, Josh Jacobs, we were talking about it in August. You know, man, is he going to sign this thing? Or are the Raiders going to rescind this tag? Because at this point, who is going to give him the amount of money that would be on the franchise tender? And it ended up that the Raiders actually gave him a little bit more than that. So he played that properly. And then he didn't necessarily have the best year. Now he's going to be a free agent. So, I mean, it's interesting. You don't have that situation at cornerback, right? If it so happens that L'Jarius Sneed, right, would have the franchise tag rescinded. And I don't anticipate that happening because Brett Veach, we know he's a good general manager. But them teams will line up all across the league, especially if they're in the AFC West, to try and get him. So that's part of the reason why the Chiefs have done it, so they can get some sort of trade out of this if they want. So, yeah, that's what makes this situation odd, because we've seen this kind of thing happen before with different guys at different spots, and this is not the way it usually goes.
That said, of the 3 times a franchise tender has been rescinded in the history of the franchise tag, twice the head coach of the team that did it was Andy Reid. So just keep that in mind. I don't think they'll rescind the L'Jarius Sneed franchise tender, but if anybody's going to do it, it's a guy who's done it. He did it with Jeremiah Trotter, and then in 2005 with Corey Simon. The whole issue of the running backs, it's funny you mentioned that, because we were talking about it on this show once we saw where the market was at running backs, and it's like, look at what the franchise tag is for Pollard and Barkley and Jacobs. And we were saying maybe these guys should think about, especially Pollard with the broken ankle, recovering from the broken ankle that he suffered on a hip drop tackle during the playoffs, maybe he should run in there and get that, because if they rescind it, he ain't going to get that anywhere else. You better go take, and somebody connected to the situation texted me not long after the show saying, do you have my phone hacked? Because it happened. It happened. I mean, that one was so obvious, and it's just foolish. And, you think a seasoned business professional like Jerry Jones would know, this is $10 million I don't have to spend on this guy. For as careful with his money, despite the fact that he's got a giant yacht and is worth multiple billions, for as careful with his money as he is, that was $10 million plus wasted last year, because he could have not tagged him at all or stripped the tag and probably gotten Tony Pollard for last year for a lot less, or somebody else of equivalent skill for a lot less than what he paid. So the Bears got Jaylon Johnson for a lot less than what they were facing if Johnson had played hardball under the franchise tag. Again, details will be coming as soon as today. We'll have them posted at PFT, and then we'll have our final word on whether or not Jaylon Johnson should have waited. At least for now, though, whatever those numbers are, we know enough that he should have at least waited until July 15, in my opinion. I hope that was explained to him. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.